All right, hopefully that's happening. And welcome to our Trees for Grace. Welcome to our Trees for Grazers silvopasture training for planners. These two virtual sessions cover species selection, layout and design, pasture assessments, planting patterns, mapping, aftercare, and farmer consultation. We have with us Joshua Green from Trees for Grazers, who's leading this training. I'll turn it over to him in just a moment. But I'd like to say that this is the last virtual training. Our first session is on YouTube now. We have a Facebook post about it, and we're working on getting it on the website if it's not already there. This recording will also go on the website. And then on May 7th, we are going to have an in-field training. That registration will be put in the chat in many seconds. As soon as Joshua starts, I'll put that there. And I'll also put the link to the Dropbox that he shared that contains some materials that might be easier for you to look at on your own. Or as he's going through his presentation, you can take a little bit more time to look at the maps. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Joshua.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Um, yeah, a little bit of apologies up front. A lot of the stuff that I have is not stuff I normally present on, so it's like inside of our sort of team space, we have a lot of different documents that we look at to try to fill out. So hopefully I don't make you guys too dizzy today. Um, Yes, nice to have a good group again, and hopefully we'll make some good progress as we think through this planning process. Um, if we had a perfect world and we could fit in our site visit between this session and our first session and this one, I think that would be in many ways more how we tend to work. Um, Making an initial contact with the farmer, trying to figure out what they're thinking, and then like getting there and seeing it is worth all kinds of looking at the maps for various reasons. You know, instantly you can see where the fences are and where the where the shade is and where the shade's not. So that could be helpful, but we'll get to dial in on a lot of that stuff as we meet next. Well, not next month, I guess. It's actually in 2 months. So look forward to that as well. So there's only so far 5 people have passed the class. Everybody else has not filled out our little survey. Um, the silvopasture questionnaire is still open. Um, it's a fill out form, and it does take about, I don't know, how long did it take for those of you that are um, in the passing section? Anybody want to suggest how long it took you? That's right. Everybody's trained to be, on mute and everything. And
Maybe half an hour, I guess.
half an
And
hour. Okay.
I wasn't putting a ton of in-depth thought into it.
Good half hour. I see a note from Amanda on that. Okay, that's good to know. 45 minutes for another folk. Yeah, I think, it's like a lot of forms you get sent these days. You can try to race through it and give the quick version. And usually when people are motivated to get a good plan, they're kind of putting a lot of detail and giving a lot of helpful information about what they're trying to do. Yeah, I'm seeing a few notes in the chat like did the did it in about 30 minutes. So that's good to know. I think some people have complained it's a little bit lengthy, but then again, you're trying to figure out what's going on in their operation so that when you get there, you have all of the questions in your mind of what you need to figure out. Um, the we went over. I was gonna do a sort of a little bit of review of what we talked about last time. some of the principles of design that we look for. And then we looked a little bit at some of our mapping tools, and I suspect some of you that are in like conservation districts, soil and water districts, you might have even um, probably better mapping imagery than we often have. Um, the one tool that I'll show you again today called Overyield is really helpful because it's kind of the main one that's really oriented around tree crops or trees. So it has kind of built in it the ability to set out grids of trees even to follow key lines. And it allows us to pick the species as a block or as a row or set up a pattern. And that's really helpful if you're trying to figure out what the tree count's going to look like. So we use that quite a lot. We also looked at a tool last week called Canopy Compass. It's just a way of getting reports specifically for agroforestry plantings. And it basically gives soils something of a rating for how productive they might be for that particular species. And a lot of times it really just it tracks as an analog with what the soil types are. So it'll kind of trigger, oh, these are wet soils. You don't want to put these types of trees here. These are, upland species. These would do well here. So it's almost a way of understanding the soils by looking at the trees that are recommended. Um, if you come from more of a soils background, you might go right to Web Soil Survey, or as I showed you, Overyield also has a kind of a way to bring up that soil info right off the bat. Um, the other tool which really helpful is Google Earth Pro. I know you guys will probably use that as well as like ArcGIS or whatever GIS um, mapping your particular organization subscribes to. Um, we also spent um, a good amount of time just highlighting the importance of what the farmer's um, goals are for the project. And so let's just think about that for just a little bit. Um, we need to have that in mind as we design the project so that we can really try to fit the farmer's goals. So let's think about a few different species for a second. So if it's shade for a beef cattle operation, that's going to send us a certain direction with our tree spacing and our layout. Probably looking at the paddocks um, that are already in the farm and the permanent fence lines and where the water is, and so that we, as much as possible, can see how that farmer is is grazing. If we're working with a really nimble grazer who's constantly changing up the paddock designs, then we don't want the tree rows to constrain that, or we might want to consider going with an overpass type system of protection so that those paddocks can sort of be infinitely variable within that. If the person's focused on poultry and looking uh, for fruit drop, then we might be skewing toward species like mulberry that drop high protein fruits, maybe other home orchard crops that can be consumed by poultry or attract a lot of insects for poultry. And the shapes of those plantings are going to change a lot. One that I'm kind of enamored of right now is as using dwarf mulberries for in rows of like 12 by 12 grid or two rows to create a really nice habitat for poultry, a lot of fruit drop, and then the potential to kind of graze those off maybe once in a season to kind of keep them vegetative. Those are a shorter species, so we're kind of excited about those. Um, if we're looking at at a hog operation or doing silvopasture for pigs. Obviously, there's a lot longer term horizon for those to be productive. But thinking about nut crops and the ways in which traditionally pigs might have been finished. So those are important to try to tease out. And really, what we're trying to do today is somewhat backwards because we're thinking a little bit about the tree species before we know what our farmer's trying to do exactly, even though I think we have some sense of it for this particular farm. So let me consider today like some of the documents that we want to go to the consultation with. And I've been trying to put some of these in the Dropbox folder that I believe Lydia shared with you. But also I'm making I converted some of the Google Docs to a drive that we'll share with you as well. So let's take a look. Oh, also, there's another property that um, I'm not sure what the plan is there, but we can potentially do a site visit that one on the same day. I think they're on the same farmer's land. So I've pulled up and done another canopy compass report on that farm. So we'll probably start by just taking a look at that and seeing what we can learn about those soils and from that map. So let me try to share my screen with you once again. Let's see here.
You can see it.
Okay. So this is the canopy compass report that let's see if this is the first one or the second one. Actually might have just pulled down there. Whoops. So this was the first farm that we looked at yesterday, and I'll find the other one just a second. I don't think it made it in that folder. But this is a very long report, but it gets into all of the soils, the topography. An important component here is southness. Or here it's called the aspect. Um, we can also get, I was going to suggest this too, as I was thinking about some of the things that we like to look at are water accumulation at certain points, especially if we have a more steep farm. So as I tab through this, we're looking at runoff and then the included crops in this. If I keep going, we'll kind of suggest which parts of those farms will work well with what trees. And then there is another map in here, which I think got downloaded as a PDF, but I don't see it right now. So we'll skip that for now. So it's a good tip is to go to those canopy compass maps. I'm going to look then at our overyield map of the farm that um, so this is, I have two projects that we're looking at with the Combs Farm. This is the first one that we sort of looked at in the first session. And what we learned was that farmers limited, especially in this field, and has some access to some shade up in here and up here. And so kind of the next thing to think about is after we find those priority areas is what species are going to work well there, what kind of machines and equipment the farmer is going to use to maintain around those trees, And then from there, we can lay out some possible designs and see if those are going to work well on that farm. Um, One of the things I think about a lot, and this is what you want to try to tease out in the consultation, are concerns about uh, other stakeholders, things about the view, aesthetics is another one. And here's one that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at this map. So on the west side of the farm is where the homestead is. And we were talking a little bit about orienting tree rows and how north and south is slightly better in terms of that shade moving around. But I laid down a couple of grids of trees here, and I'm just going to adjust these so they're a little bit larger. And these are just like 2-minute grids of trees. What happens if my trees are laid out in this way? And think about it from the perspective of the farmer. And here's what I'm thinking. You don't have to guess this time. But I know like when I'm on my farm, there's a lot of places where I can stand and look and see the cattle. And if I plant a whole bunch of trees and I stagger them and I block the view, it's really going to be a kind of a disconcerting change. All of a sudden, if you have no idea where your cattle are and you're used to seeing them, um, that's going to be a tough one. Now, some farmers who are silvopasturing have gotten over that and they're not looking for their animals, all that. But that would be a big change and something to think about. So if I oriented this tree row, these tree rows in this configuration, I won't get quite the nice benefit of um, maybe the north-south aspect that we were talking about. But now the farmer can, from the farmstead, see down through those rows and find those cattle. So those kinds of things are important. Sometimes if you plan a farm out with trees and tree shelters, it's a pretty jarring change. And so figuring out what those aesthetic considerations are as well. It's also nice to tell the rest of the family what's happening before you plan out a huge farm with trees. That's just a personal little tip there. Not that that's going to happen in this situation. So then we have one more farm that we're going to try to take a look at. I put it on a separate overyield file, and I don't have any drawings here, but I understand this is kind of a blank slate. It's mostly this parcel section in here. I'll just make a little farm boundary here, essentially of what we're talking about. And is this potentially going to be set up with the grazing plan? Lydia, do you know that? What's the concept here?
I believe so. Haley's on though, so she could
Okay,
probably provide a
go
little
ahead.
bit more context.
Put you on the
So
spot.
all of that ground that you have um, marked out at the moment, that piece to the left as well also is in that. And there is 6 different paddocks that are going in that. And there's no vegetation in there at all other than that strip of trees your mouse is sitting on currently.
Okay. All right. So they're gonna I saw there's a let's see, I think it's right in here. There we go. So this is what you sent to me this morning. And so all of those lots are the paddocks, is that right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And
And then
then
the one, yep,
and this is the other side of
a
what looks like
diversion ditch.
a diversion. Okay.
Yep.
All right. And then that will have fence on it and it will also have water that will be included?
So there is a spring development being put in at the top of the hill there, and then we're running a summer watering system above ground between the bigger lot in the top and the little lot in the bottom.
So that's going to come down the bigger lot on the top along
So
this
you're
line.
going, yep. So you're gonna go west on that, and then you'll go down
down here.
to the, yep, and then there'll be
Okay.
another watering system there as well.
Okay, so that's awesome. So spring development, um, and then those fence lines are going to be pounded in like high tensile fence. Is that the idea?
Correct.
Okay. All right. It's great. It's great to see like kind of a blank slate like that. And so this is where he's probably going to trailer cattle over here from the other farm for the summer. Is that the
So he
kind
actually owns in between the farmstead that we originally looked at to this one. So that cross pipe that's up above,
right here? Okay.
they own an access road up through there.
Okay. That's excellent. And so yeah, so there's a lot of neat things that to think through on this project. Um, the sequence of things. It's pretty nice to have fences installed first. That's often the water lines too. With this one being above ground, we'll be a lot less limited by that. And then thinking how um, we can provide shade that will work for each of these six paddocks. So that'll be a nice part of the project. And then we'll be able to do both on the site visit. Okay, so what I'm going to show next, hopefully this will pop up and you can see this. This is a little document that we have internally that just kind of guides what we want to try to do at our in-person consultation. Uh, as we talked about earlier, we typically want to have a map and a sense of where we're going. And then we bring all these resources with us, including a tape, a shovel for some shovel tests, thinking through their questionnaire with questions that we need to clarify. That's kind of what the sit down part here is. And I'm just going to walk through this document for a second. So it's typically be a 3 hour conversation. Visit, not necessarily 3 hours with the farmer. Of course, in the first half an hour you expect or hour you expect to spend with the farmer, clarifying things about how they work on their farm, how the cattle move, thinking about the infrastructure, questions that um, they might have for you, and then we'll get started on what's called the planting plan. And so then we move to the site assessment, where we're trying to get a good perspective on the whole property. And sometimes farmers will take you around on side by side, sometimes it's a walk. Um, and looking at those priority areas. It's a good time to talk about figure out where the drainage issues are, like where does water tend to pull up in the spring or this time of the year? And then start to think about the layout type. Um, as you know, like we're pretty big on grids, but that doesn't we're not stuck on that. Um, it might make sense to do some clumps of some kind of nodes of trees throughout the farm. One of the things I picked up from, I think it was Sarah Flack's talk not too long ago on the Cornell Small Farms, was just the way that like a large sort of clump of trees in certain areas of the farm can make a lot of sense to keep the ground open for making hay. Um, or coming in and drilling in some summer annuals for resetting pastures, that sort of thing. And I think maybe the potential of that will really shine as some of these GPS collars become cheaper and more available, that you can uh, bring the goats in and clear out sections where you can't really dial in and protect a single tree, but you could, um, you can use fences within fences and protect the certain areas. So that's certainly an interesting thing. So then figuring out the aesthetics, sometimes when I mentioned like the view shed, we had a farm that we laid out where the farmer did kind of want to be able to see from their like porch. They have a lot of small livestock, and they're used to being able to see them. And so we laid out like kind of a radius all the way around the farm, and you could pretty much see through all of it. And so it created quite an interesting pattern. But that's what they wanted, and I can see their point. They can see their animals pretty much from that porch or deck at any point. So then when we kind of finish with that site visit, we'll write up a proposal where we want the farmers to see if they want to kind of keep moving. And at that point, we try to have an overview, which is our a paragraph or two about their vision, goals, interests, problem areas, why they're pursuing this, so we can keep that in mind as we're doing the design. And then a proposal of some type, like we'll keep planning and they'll agree to that. Or maybe they're happy with it at that point. They want to keep playing around on their own. So from there, we'll keep going on our plan if they want us to. And a lot of our planning will then happen in overyield. And let's play around in that for just a little bit. So again, this is kind of back to this particular software, and I'll show you how I'm going to go back to the other project here on the Combs farm, on the home farm here. So from what we gathered at our previous session, probably the priority area is going to be this lower field here, and we'll figure that out a little further as we meet with the farmer in a couple months. But let's go in here, and I see on this particular farm is that this is a big wide open field here. Let's see if we can create the boundary so we know about. Oh, let's see. We'll do what's called we'll draw a headlands here, and this might not be right on. Okay, and so right now I've in that headlands, we have basically just hopefully you can see that line. If it's not clear, just reach out. This is basically representing the fence line, and in this software we've set the headlands, it's automatically populated, I think, to be 30 feet. Let's say that we keep that at 50 feet around the outside. So that moved that line in there. Are you able to see those okay, Lydia?
Yep, we can see them. I mean,
Okay.
it's probably tough for anybody who's colorblind, but because it's green on
Okay.
green.
The colors in this software, yeah, they can make you strain. They're pretty similar to a lot of the background imagery, which by the way, I think I can change that base layer to be a little bit. Oh, yeah, you can see there's some serious grazing there. I think that one shows a
That's
little bit.
better.
Okay, you can see a little bit of the contrast better. Which reminds me, I pulled this up on Google Earth Pro because the overyield doesn't have the best imagery, and I'm getting a lot of like little, you know, insights here. I can see the fence line a little bit better, see the fence posts. I can see how cattle are trailing in and out of these fences. I think I've got a gate opening here. So, the better imagery you have, the more you can kind of learn. So, that this was quite fun. You can get a little bit of a sense. But what my sense is with this field is in the south, and the southern portion is the only place probably where there's going to get some shade, and the cows are almost always going to congregate down along this wood line, even though they're not able to get into the woods. I don't know that to be the case, but obviously being there for 5 minutes, you'd be able to see that the nutrients are stacking up here, over time. they're grazing here, depositing nutrients in the south, and so that nice even distribution of nutrients is not going to happen. So, and that's really one of the things I'm thinking about a lot of times, is how are the nutrients going to move? And now that I see this map a little bit better, I think I can adjust this feature because the fence line actually goes out to here. Okay, so let's lay out a grid of trees, and we'll just say that it covers this entire space here.
Is this
Like
the paid version of overyield? I'm assuming.
it is, yes.
And can you do these same things on a free version or no?
I do not know that answer to that.
Gotcha.
There's probably the answer is no.
Gotcha.
That's what I think. Otherwise, yeah. But it's really handy if you're doing a lot of this, this type of stuff. I don't know what other software you guys use to lay things out on, but I'll show you some of it. I didn't intend to become a salesman for it, but I guess I kind of am right now. Okay, so here I have a grid, and what it allows me to do is to go over here and select a crop. So we have a lot of different crops in here. These are all trees. These are all different mixes of trees that we've played with. And so the ones that are in here are usually specifically um, crops that are planted for some kind of economic value outside of shade, which is the primary reason that we're planting trees. But we'll just pick I know, probably a no-no black locust here, and it will sort of pre-populate a spacing for you. This is 40 feet in the row and sorry, between the rows and 20 feet in a row. And we can change that to whatever we want. Um, and so that's 50 by 20. And let's just take a look at this whole field area is said to be 7¼ acres. And it gives me a tree count of 320 stems. And it's said to be 44 stems per acre. So if you recall, I showed you some of those um, different spacings and what kind of tree numbers they get. That's pretty similar to a lot of our plantings. It'll be like 30 to 45, maybe 50 trees to the acre. Now at 20 in a row, it's not going to be too long where I think you're going to have too much shade there. There might be some people that would disagree with me on that, but let's just change it to 50 by 25. And so now I'm at like 35 stems per the acre, and it's at 256 stems. Okay, so that's just a starter concept. Well, what if we don't want to have that many black locust trees in the mix? Well, we can change there's this nice little feature that they developed where we can have a pattern, and we'll just call it combs. And here I'll put black locust, and I'll go 25-foot spacing. And then I'll put in, who's got a vote? I heard that. Tulip poplar. All right, do you want to put in another tree species here? Lydia, you pick.
Yeah, go down to the drop down list. I'm not afraid.
Okay. There's apples, there's willow, we have hickory, other types of locusts, walnuts, blueberry.
So the other two, black locust and tulip poplar, are probably going to grow pretty fast.
That's right.
Do we want to keep on with fast growing species, or would it make sense to do something a little slower,
Hmm.
like
Yeah,
black
let's
walnut
just
or hickory?
let's talk about that for a second because it's something we think about, like a lot of our early plans, we put like a fast grower and a slow grower together, like alternate. And our idea was, okay, if we put in, let's say it was a white oak. Where are you, white oaks? I think they're back here. It's going to be a long time before we see much shade out of it. So if we put a willow there, a hybrid willow or a black locust, then we'll have shade in 3 to 5 years. Um, some of the thoughts I'm thinking about are that like getting rid of these trees, taking them out of the way, and that 5 to 10 year mark, it's going to be a lot of work. Um, maybe as much as possible, we can plant as big a trees as we can and just plant the trees that we want. So those are some of the thoughts I have. The other thing is if you're trying to protect all those trees in a row, and in 3 years that black locust blew out of that tree shelter, and that was your kind of plan, was to take all the shelters off when those trees were maybe tough enough to handle a little bit of abuse. Well, then all of a sudden you still got to protect that white oak tree for a long time. So I don't know. I don't think about it as finding the perfect solution, but more just like trade-offs. And you know, we'll tell you in 5 or 10 years if it was a good idea or not. We try to think through it as well as we can. But what I see with, if I drop a white oak in there is I'm gonna have one out of every 3 trees that still kind of needs protection, maybe. And it's gonna be a long time. So that's just an idea. What else should we add here? Oh, and why not just plain all black locust while we're at
Yeah,
it?
or like, so you're thinking you want trees in a row that all have like the same type of growth rate, so you can use the same protection method through over
Mhm.
time.
That's the way I'm thinking about it right now. Um, I wouldn't say that's how most of our projects are. Um, but I know if we just plop down a shagbark hickory and it's going to be drilling taproot down into the ground for 3 or 4 years before it even starts to look like it's growing, then it is going to create a management challenge. Well, let's say as far as black locusts go, we probably don't want to put all of those trees as black locusts because uh, of maybe a borer problem or a disease problem. Like we're always thinking about diversity for those reasons. Um, but well, let's go with this right now and see how it behaves. So now I think we can add this little pattern in here, and now it tells us that we've still got those 35 stems, and then I think you should be able to see it's about 128 black locusts and 124 tulip poplar trees for that planting. Okay, so let's say that the farmer really likes this plan. He can see kind of like by just moving a little bit, you can see his cows running down here. And um, but let's say he's a grazer and he likes to sometimes graze in vertical like strips this way and this way. So we want to figure out, okay, how are we going to protect these trees? So that's going to be another part of our plan is what's the tree protection method. Now, if we're trying to keep all of the fencing out of the way for the farmer, then we might go for the overpass system. It might be if this is say a 7 acre plot, he might actually be helped by having a fence, a paddock boundary fence right through the middle. And then that would give him a kind of built-in grid for some of it. So that would just be something we would need to talk through. On the other farm, well, we'll come back to that. somebody, you guys want to react to it? I feel like I'm maybe talking to myself right now just because of the Zoom thing, but
Yeah,
how
let's
about,
let's
how
give
about some
folks a minute.
questions? Yeah.
Maybe they'll get some questions out there. I have a question. So you set up
Hmm.
this grid system, and then do you also use like temporary fencing within this to set up paddocks? Like, how do
That would
you
be right.
move temporary fencing around in
Hmm.
this situation?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. Maybe I'll have to I might make you dizzy here, but let me go over to I was showing you these resources yesterday, and this is just a place where I think I have a handy photo that will allow me to explain it a little bit better. Maybe not. I'm just pulling up the profile of the Drager farm that we kind of walked through their plan and some of the maps yesterday. And Drager has installed the overpass system. In fact, I think I have some photos on there that will show even some more detail. So you can see the cows. Just got a herd of low line Angus cows here. See how they're all actually under the polywire? Hopefully that's coming through here. So like this is a piece of wire that's at about 6 feet. And I'm trying to mouse over it there. My mouse is not very big, but those cows are actually underneath that fence wire right now. So in other words, there's no internal fencing that's inhibiting cattle from moving around. So any paddocks that he wants to set up, he has to run a regular poly reel with, pigtail posts or whatever type to fence those cattle in. So how are these trees protected? Well, around each tree, there's a little spiral of aluminum wire that's 17 gauge, and that's what's carrying the spark. And so each of those shelters are livened up with electric spark. Is that making sense?
Yeah, and if folks were trying to set up polywire, normally do they do that on four-wheelers or do they do it on foot? Like, is it easy enough for them to just move through that system? And I don't know. I don't know these questions. I'm kind of
Yeah.
baiting to see if like any of our participants have the same type of questions, but maybe can better articulate it.
Yeah, so all the interior fencing is set up by um yep, a human being, not an AI robot at this point. Like actually walking a reel. During the break, I'll grab some of the equipment that's sitting outside and show it to you. But you basically just are unrolling this piece of polywire on a cord reel and then attaching it on one end or the other with a jumper clip or a handle that has a metal end on it. And so that's something that grazers do, every day. Some people do it all on four-wheeler. Some people like to walk it. Some people can do the entire thing on a side by side. It just depends on the farm. So let me so let's think here for a little bit, and I don't know if this will show up as a concept um, in the projects that you're thinking of, but let's just say that they don't do any rotational grazing. And so, well, let's strike that. Let's say that the way that they graze right now is they go from this 7 acre paddock and then they go up and they graze in this field and maybe they graze this field too and then they come here and then they come back to this field. Okay, so that's going to give them, let's say that it's 4 paddocks. And if they want to have a 30-day rest period, it's roughly 7 or 8 days in each paddock. So, um, my concept is, can we just add some tree rows there that would help their grazing system? Because really, if we could get that down to a 3 days occupancy for each of those paddocks, their grass production would go way up. Um, Animal performance would go up. There's just a lot of benefits to moving into that 3 day maximum occupation for those cattle. So what we would need on a farm to do that is we'd need at least 10 paddocks rather than 4. So let's just say that we add a line of trees here. And now this assumes that there's water in both of those paddocks, or there's a way to get water to this lower paddock. But let's just say that, suppose that we put a row of trees there. We can figure out what those are. We can use our Combs pattern that we developed last time, which is, let's see, I think I've got the right pattern on there. Yep. Okay. So now, if we could do this as a paddock boundary and actually run the poly wire at like about hip height, now we have 2 paddocks instead of 1 paddock. And if we could do that a couple more places on this farm, and still provide water, then we could soon get to the place where every paddock would get a 3 day occupancy. And I think that would really be a great strategy for just improving people's rotational grazing, for getting them started on it. Um, those tree rows are the poly wire that they could set out. You could do this all without these trees, of course. But I know for me, and I think like Lynn Bliven out in Allegheny, she said the same thing. She's like, having these tree rows has made me a better grazer because now I can go and let me add a few more sections here. Now, instead of me having to stretch out all this poly wire, actually, this will go out here, not to just the headlands. Now, it's not perfect, but now all of a sudden, where I would have to set up, this is in terms of length, this is, yeah, it's almost 1,000 feet. So that's a full quarter-mile reel to get out there, and, probably 30 posts. Now I can do it with, about 6 to 10 poly posts. And now it's a job that instead of it being a half an hour job, it turns into a 10-minute job. And now you can really get excited about moving cows when it only takes you about 5 or 10 minutes. So again, that example would assume that you would be able to get water in each of those paddocks, or you'd have to create some kind of laneway to get back to the water. Like we were talking about on the other farm, looks like the water's going to be set up pretty nicely.
We have a few questions.
Oh yeah.
Would the overpass system work to protect beehives and in support of flowering orchards?
Beehives, he would probably need to, yeah, I mean, so the nice thing about the overpass wire is you can kind of string wire overhead on the tree shelters and still be able to move underneath it with equipment, which was kind of what we were talking about earlier. Um, Let me show you another. So that was really a big idea of Drager's farm. Let me just again, here's the similar thing, but let me show you this little thing that he developed because he really likes to drive wherever he wants to on his farm without getting in the way. So here you can kind of see like here's a wire going overhead. But what I wanted to show you was, so he went way over the top, but he has wires carried around his farm with these black locust A-frames again, like Austin likes to say, this is not required to make this work. But he wanted to be able to drive his tractor. Remember how I showed you he was bale grazing all over the farm? So he spent all kinds of time, and all these trees were from his farm, and he got a little band mill. And basically, what you're looking at there is overpass on steroids, so he can get to any of his paddocks without having to move any wires. But to do protect a beehive, um, or sorry, yeah, a bee yard, you can use electric wire for it. I'm not sure why you would need to use overpass unless you're trying to make it so you could move around the bee yard without having to worry about um, polywire in your way. But I know I'm not sure who's asking the question, but like bears can still be a problem for bees. One of my friends was a beekeeper and he had wired to his right outside of his bee yard a photoelectric switch, like one of those ones that you have for your outdoor lights, and would turn the lights on and turn his shop back on. And he also had electric fence. So the other question was about orchards. And you can definitely protect orchards with overpass. I guess one of the concerns is a lot of orchards, if they're not standard tree stock, like if they're semi-dwarfs or dwarfs, is they don't really get that tall. And so you really can't put them in a 6 foot tree shelter because they don't get taller than maybe 7 or 8 feet, some of these dwarf varieties. So I think in those cases, if you're really trying to optimize production and put a lot of trees per the acre, it probably makes sense to have a separate standalone um, orchard. Yeah, I'm trying to, I just found the chat here. So,
Yep. So
uh,
we had another about the height of the tree tubes, but I
okay.
answered they're 6 foot and that you
Hmm.
use the planter system.
Um, yeah, so if it's cattle, we almost always recommend those 6 foot tree shelters. If it's sheep, 5 footers are great. If you're trying to protect against deer, 5 foot shelters work well. If it's only deer, we will use like 36, I think it's maybe a 42-inch wrap. And so, in our other jobs, we do a lot of buffers. Um, and so we'll put a lot of large live stakes in. Um, and we'll just protect those with a wrap, which basically keeps the bark intact and deer can still rub on them, but that's how we'll tend to protect against that. Yeah, were there any other questions in the chat that we
That's all I've seen.
okay.
I did ask if we could get a copy of all those questions in that questionnaire so that we have those to make sure that we have all the information we need, or do we get to print out the questionnaire and so then we would know what wasn't filled out?
Yes. I have one in the queue um, that I'll paste into that Google Drive so you can see those questions as well. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because I think we do have our questionnaire on our website. I think it's a little older version of it, but you can also see it there at treesforgrazers.com/learn. I think resources. When you go down there, you can see the questionnaire with the explanations. So that might be helpful too. There's another document I wanted to show you too that ultimately, especially since USC is talking about, having other people plant out these projects, um, we'll eventually get, this is kind of skipping ahead of the plan proper, but we'll eventually end up with a crew lead document that has a bunch of different stuff on it. Some of them I put in this Dropbox and some of them maybe didn't quite make it yet. But at some point when we send a crew out to the job, they'll get the crew lead, which will have a bunch of basic stuff like who the consultant was, what the address is, our tree list. Then on the next page, our project materials list, like how many shelters, how many T-posts, how many guards, how many rolls of polywire, rolls of aluminum, gate handles, wood chip mulch, root dip, and then who's going to be on the crew, and then what machinery we might need. If it's us doing the project, we'll try to have um, an auger there, perhaps, our little mini skidder with a bucket to load up chips. Then there'll be site assessment notes, and here's where I think a lot of the early consultation stuff kind of comes back up. Um, if you're thinking about doing a project, like the access is a really big deal. In some farms, um, there's a lot of fencing and a lot of gates to cross. It can really rack up a lot of extra time trying to get into the project. Um, there are those considerations, but we also just want to tell our crew where they can and cannot um, access the project. Water lines, are there buried water lines? Are there utilities? In our state, we typically have to call 811. I don't know if New York has one of those where you basically, if you do any digging, you need to have that sign off from the people that keep track of all the buried utilities. And then under mulch notes and fencing notes, we'll have specific notes for each section. So whether it's going to be like an overpass protection system, paddock boundary, maybe no protection. In some cases, they'll just be tree shelters if they think the sheep aren't going to knock the trees over. It'll kind of go like that. So that's just um, a little detailed document that we're going to eventually send out with the crew. Okay, we'll jump back over to the over yield map here. And I got one new. Okay. So does that make sense about like possibly using a tree planting like that for helping out with rotational grazing? I think our friends at American Farmland Trust are trying to do something like this down in Virginia where there's just vast acreages under continuous grazing, and to be able to just grid out some of those really big fields with a few tree lines um, is almost a way of providing shade and habitat. But at the same time, I think the producers are going to see, oh, we're getting a lot more grass production if we give those grasses that 30 or 40-day rest period that we'd like to see. All right, let's talk. Let's do another design concept here. Um, we tried a couple on this field. Um,
I have one clarifying question that
Sure.
plays a little bit into some questions we asked Wednesday.
Mhm.
We talked about the orientation of this and putting the rows north, south, or east, west. Here you put them east, west. Is that what we think we always should do, or is that literally because of the size of the lines? Like what guided that decision again?
Yeah, so I was thinking about two things on this particular one, and I was trying to make clear like if the farmer has concerns about the view and like monitoring cattle from his barn homestead area, that might trump laying them out north and south. Does that part make sense?
Yep.
Like if I lay him out in this way, he can't see anything all of a sudden, right? Because if these trees were somewhat offset, I mean, maybe if they were in a perfect grid, they might be able to see down through there. If they were somewhat staggered, the view might be limited. It might still work fine if all the trees were lined up in that configuration. That could still work. But there's one other consideration I was thinking about, and this may or may not be real. Um, like a lot of stuff you think about when you're doing a remote consultation, it may or may not be real. Is how I would mow this field is I'd be mowing, okay, the more turns you have to make in your tractor, the less efficient you are. So like I would probably want to mow this um, east or west. That's what I was thinking in laying it out the other way. So a couple little things that triggers in my that I probably didn't say yet is that if we ran those rows north and south this way, we couldn't travel this way with the tractor because even though there's 6 feet of height at that in that overpass system, your tractor's not going to fit under there. Your four-wheeler will, unless you're 7 feet tall. Like I'm 5'11" or 5'10", so I might duck a little bit to walk under that, but you're not going to run through there with equipment. So what I'm thinking about is like most of these grazers, they're going to be, especially if we plant trees and they're not going to make hay there anymore, they're going to want to be in that pasture once at least um, per year, clipping off those seed heads and sometimes after the first grazing for seed heads, sometimes just in the fall to beat back some of the brushy stuff. Now, there are grazers that don't ever clip um, because they get enough impact and they're really dialed in on their grazing, but I'd say that's more the exception than the rule. Yeah, and so let's play with this just a little bit more. So let's say that we did orient it this way, and I'll make it match up a little bit before the size of the planting that we had. Which, by the way, like I think default on here is like 20 feet in row, 20 feet between row, something like that. So let's open this up to about 100 feet and 30 feet. Okay, so we could line up the trees if we ran the rows this way. We probably could still line them up in such a way that there would be a view from the farmstead there, but not likely as well as this version of it. Just offset that a little bit so I get 4 rows. So that's 100 feet between the row, and that's 30 feet in row. And we didn't choose a species there, but that's going to give about 15 stems per the acre. So it's a good bit lighter, which makes me wonder, is there any stem per acre requirement for any of the projects that you have in mind up in your region?
N- Not at this time.
Okay.
Where I don't know if Cole can come up. I
Yeah.
know that he has a couple projects going and you're involved with that. And I don't know if there was a per acre requirement. I think, yeah, I'll let him answer if he wants to come on. But no, I think we're looking to figure that out, what it should be.
Yeah.
There is a per acre for the NRCS silvopasture 381, but you can also do, and James I think is on the call, so he can provide more information, but we can also do the tree shrub planting, and then you don't run into those densities restrictions. And then ours, we're I think we've kind of come up with the plan for the density, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm. which is on the order of 40 by 20. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, let's lay that out. Let's lay that out in a couple of places here and see how that looks on this farm. And that'll be, I think, a good little exercise for us to look at the tree count. And let me hide this section. And let's see, we'll actually just delete that one. Do we have any idea of what equipment might be used on this farm? Is it that's always a question I'll have before I'll start laying out rows because I want to know, like, here I've set up a 50-foot headland. And now for me, when I have my 12-foot wide mower, that's a gracious plenty. But it's still good to consider extra room on the ends. I know you guys are coming from more of the like tree planter world and less thinking maybe about some of the equipment and access issues, but you get 50 foot on the end of a row and it seems like a lot until you get a wagon and a tractor connected together and all of a sudden it gets pretty tight, especially when ground's slippery and you can't count on like doing a hairpin 3-point turn. So just throw that in there again. But let's do a new section here. We'll grid it out again with a 40 by 20 and
Haley
well,
is on, and I think she can let you know what type of
okay.
equipment we have so we can
Yep.
frame it a little better.
So he has an 8-foot brush hog, and he actually, I giggle at this, but he has a riding lawnmower that he mows along all his fence lines with. He does 3 trips around.
Sure. And I just ran into another guy on really steep upland site and he uses like a Ventrac mower and he can dial that in and get everywhere. So it's yeah, that's great. Okay, so here's how I'm thinking about this farm. It's like, okay, I'm gonna lay this out 40 by 20 like Cole's plan here. Um kind of offset it a little bit to get those tree rows to, so I have a little bit more than 50 on those sides. So that particular, we'll put that Combs pattern in there, which is probably not what we might end up with, but it's just a placeholder pattern until we know. We would, um, yeah, well, we can go back to the soils a little bit later, but we'd want to be talking to we want to be looking at on the site assessment. I should probably just say this too, but we'd be looking at the trees around the landscape. I mean, you can look at a tree book and tell what things are there, but sometimes you can really see it's like this is a really great site for these trees, or the farmer will know these trees grow like weeds here, which might be a good tip. So I'm gonna think that still thinking about this middle section here that if we could use those existing trees um, effectively, that might be a really nice way to keep this land in maybe more open pasture. So one of the things I would think about is maybe trying to bring in a permanent fence line through the trees. Um, Fence lines inside the woods are super easy to maintain. Um, they don't get as much of the brushy problems that you get with the edges, at least in my experience. And then if we could somehow have a center fence line in there, let me just draw a little line so we can visualize that. And then, or maybe stop it back in here. Then we could encourage like assuming there's no like high value timber in here that we're trying to protect, they're just already pretty much uh, tough, mature trees, then we could kind of develop some weird paddocks, but it can work. That's the beauty of this poly fence is you can do whatever you want. You can weave it around. And so let's say we kind of do something like this, and assuming we can get water in all these paddocks, um, now they can graze this section And then if it's hot and if it's not hot, let's say it's in the fall or winter grazing, we can just fence this out. And now we have a paddock here, paddock here, paddock here, and here. And then I'm not sure where the water is, but it looks like there's probably some infrastructure here, or it could be a summer water paddock like we talked about before. So maybe what I'm suggesting is this isn't a priority area for the planting, but it could be some area to use for shade, and then maybe our other primary area is in this field. We don't, I'm not remembering, is there any hay being made here?
That field, yes.
Okay. And so maybe this is a field where the farmer doesn't want to touch it. Um, and if he's going to make hay there, um, he might not want to, but he's still grazing it. So maybe he just wants to have, I was going to say a single fence line, but let me see what like 150 looks like on here. Let me draw it first. Would 2 rows of trees help? That might just make his life miserable. I don't know. My tendency is to more to like have, even though the whole thing that we're trying to do is sort of create like an edge effect, but it's still like makes more sense to me to have the hay field, and then this can be the kind of summer respite. For like we're gonna get a brutal weekend um in August, and that's where that gets grazed.
We have a question from Amanda about what fencing do you use in the forested areas?
Oh, that could be something temporary, or it could be a little strip of high tensile in there. Um, Either way, um, if these beef cows are pretty well respecting perimeter fence, then just maybe like a 2-strand high tensile running into there. And we'll see.
And,
When we go there, we'll see. Does that make sense, or is that not a good strategy
and her follow-up was asking if you follow NRCS standards for that.
for the fence? Or oh, if it's NRCS standards, I don't think we're going to be going into the woods with any fence, from my understanding. Maybe James can correct me on that.
I don't
Is
see
that
why you
correct?
couldn't,
What's
but
that?
I don't see why you couldn't.
Okay. Okay, so you're just thinking about like, um, yeah, the NRCS probably won't pay for a 2-strand fence. And if it was just a piece of fence like that, I don't know if I'd try to get it cost shared. I'd just build it 300 feet of fence, $2 a foot, $600. Maybe I do it with poly wire. That way I'm more flexible, and I might want to maybe only want cows in a little part of that. I don't know. So, what are your thoughts here? I don't know if there's any farmers on the call that can think through, like, if you're making hay on this field, again, just because of the orientation, they're going to be traveling north and south on this field. So it's potential that we could um, maybe put some trees in there, but I think if it's his hay field, he's probably not going to be interested in that. Um, that'd be my experience, and I think it probably would make sense because it gives him another way of storing forage. I could see a bunch of wrapped bales like over here, so presumably he's got a pretty set up hay feeding program. So I might just stay out of that, and I might maybe this is going to be our little silvopasture site. Another concept would be Um, yeah, we could just try to split this field down the middle and that would be it. So that little piece there, we'll put in planting mix 1. What's in that? Oh, that took over the whole thing. Don't do that. Sorry, folks. That was locust, tulip poplar. Oh, this is all that planting mix 1. I think I have to look in a note to see what what that one was in. So we'll delete that layer. So do you think that we will um if we just bring in, this is our phase 1 concept. Maybe we play around with the tree species a little bit and the spacing. That might be a good starter, good start, good phase 1 project. It's going to be pretty big. It's going to have, yeah, 312 stems, 43 stems to the acre. We're set up with, see, a 40 by 20 spacing right now. And so that's a lot of trees, on a 7-acre pasture. Might be a little too heavy, but it'll definitely give that farmer, he'll know after that planting if he wants to keep on going or if that doesn't make sense in his management there.
Something I guess maybe you are allowed to do it in New York State and maybe someone on this call can confirm, but I don't think we can plant black locusts
Yeah, maybe not.
around these parts.
Okay. Well, let's talk through that then.
Mhm.
So what would be the species that we would look for that would
Just
do
to
well?
break in there, if James isn't on the call, I did speak with James about that, and for New York State, and what NRCS thinks about black locust. So it is listed as potentially weedy, and that you need to be considerate about how you're planting it. But essentially, within a managed system, you are allowed to plant the black locust. So they're not concerned about it within a managed system. Where you won't want to plant it is potentially where they'd be much more cautious is like regeneration, forest regeneration, where it might take over and kind of interfere with the other regeneration of the forest natural diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you
Okay.
for that clarification.
I think's cool.
Yeah. Oh, there's James. Yeah.
Was somebody else going to chime in on that question of black locust?
I think James wrote in the chat
Oh, okay.
some
Oh,
more information and maybe, yeah,
okay.
regulated versus noxious or invasive.
And so let's dive into that just a little bit more. And with reference to black locust trees, um, one of the virtues of them is that they're not they're legumes, they're nitrogen fixers. Um, they can produce some additional nitrogen in the soil profile, but I think the most important virtue is that they don't really need nutrients, um, rich soils to perform well. So they seem to just be like uh, always growing really well on almost any soil. The only exception there might be like a really wet area, which they would not prefer. So just these general seedling black locusts are probably the cheapest tree, and we just see it as like the biggest bang for the buck. I mean, you can get a $3 tree, and we typically will have like 3 to 4 footers that we put in the tree tube, and they'll be out of the tree tube in the first year. In the second year, their arms are sticking out, and then the third year, it's like there's a little bit of shade there. So that's why we like them so much. They do have thorns on them that are really only a function of their or a part of their like smaller branches, and so they're not really a problem in that way. And then there are some important cultivars of them. So like you might have heard of the Steiner locusts, um, as well as like Propagate has some um, varieties like Turbo Obelisk and Purple Robe that are one that has purple flowers and the other one that's just known for its like timber form. And I think it is potential to get of all the other species, we're not going to get timber quality trees out of plantings like this, um, with the exception of maybe some of these trees like black locust and that are going to be able to grow posts or decking. But I think if we know those are the goals, um, we would probably approach this planting differently and look for a good bit higher density because those trees just need that competition, like growing cut flowers. They need to be always seeking sunlight straight up, and in order to get that timber form, that nice straight bowl that's the saleable portion of the log. So there's just a little bit about that. Like sometimes when people are talking about their goals and they want to have timber, then our typical kind of grid layout is not going to make sense, and it probably makes more sense to do that in a block, um, where you're looking at really prioritizing the timber growth, and that may not be compatible with cattle for a while because it's if you plant it at a density enough that you really just want to fence out animals until they get up to a size where they can handle that impact. Yeah, so those are some thoughts there about trying to grow timber. Let's suppose though that farmer doesn't want to be an apple farmer, but would like to have some some fruit or some fodder in the mix. So let's go back to our planting here and think about, let's edit this guy here. It's going to be called the Combs 2. So we could definitely add in here, and we find this on a lot of farms, is that they don't want to be apple farmers, but they might like to have some cider apples in the mix, and maybe they're or table apples, dessert apples, so they can make applesauce. And I'll tell you the concern that certain farmers have with that is that if they're in a true rotational grazing system, they'll only come back to that apple block in 30 days. There's a potential there's a pile of apples there, and the dairy farmers will be very nervous about that because any massive quick changes in diet, big sugar boosts like that can knock out milk production. I think most beef people are a little less nervous about it. And if it was a continuously grazed system, the apples are slowly falling or they're slowly ripening, and then the animals would basically get a smaller dose of those, um, and not get bloat and those types of things. So that's just something to think about. If you're into, I don't know, are there any hog silvopasture folks interested there? I mean, they're certainly not worried about too much of one thing since I think the pigs are going to be pretty tough in that context.
There might be some coony farmers around that folks deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, Tega has a question about how you estimate the plantings, the cost for the plantings
Mm-hmm.
and the different protection methods.
Mm-hmm.
Do you go by acre or by stem for materials? How do you estimate costs?
Yeah, good question. I haven't dived into all like how we figure this out. Um, we have it's helped us to be able to do this year over year and see like um, how much time things have taken us. But let's just kind of go through the basic list. So the first thing is we have our planning costs, which we really just try to cover the consultants' uh, time. And I shared some of that stuff with you a couple of days ago, but it's time in the car. It's usually doing some research ahead of time to look at the maps and the soils, reading, understanding the questionnaire, back and forth with the farmer to try to set up a good time to meet. So all that kind of planning stuff is its own thing. And then if they want us to install the project, then we'll write up, an estimate and start working on that. And so what our estimate will have, it'll have first of all layout, and that's like our consultants going there to flag the whole field. And the way that we do that is usually two of us will go because we're using old school rollout tapes and we have our anchor points. Like for example, in this field, let's say this corner over here is an anchor point and this corner is an anchor point. We know like these are the two fence lines we're going to measure everything off of. And so we'll just go down through and we'll measure 30 feet all the way down there. And we'll just keep leapfrogging tapes so we get to the end of the field. And then we'll stretch tapes this way and make this measurement. And it's pretty primitive. Um, we do have a GPS that I think we can use for layout. We haven't tended to do that because most of the fields they're just a good bit smaller. And you can really do an amazing job with tapes, especially if you're pounding those planter stakes in because you can see the grid pattern from like a mile away. So I jumped in a little bit of our technique of layout, but the layout is like a couple dollars a tree, something like that. Maybe it's $1.75. We have kind of a price for all this stuff. Then we have the shelter, which includes the stake and which is fiberglass, the plantra 6-foot shelter, and then that comes with 3 twist ties. So there's that price. Um, if you don't buy them in bulk, they can easily be $10 to $11 a piece. For people in our watershed, a lot of times we're able to get them for free, which helps a lot. Then we have the Volgard, which is like 60 cents. And then we have our price for actually planting the tree. And one of the things that we learned is like, because we came out of the riparian buffer world, is like you can plant like 6 trees per hour, um, or maybe up to 10. But in silvopasture, this is one of the things we're doing at consultation is looking at access. Some sites are super easy. You can roll your trailer right to the job. And if you have multiple fields, and you're trying to jockey all this stuff through and little winding bridges to get there, it just gets more and more time consuming. So we'll rate our jobs as like, is it easy planting or is this a difficult planting? And we have a few steps in between and we kind of rate it. It's going to be like 4 trees per hour, or is it going to be 2 trees per hour? Which sounds like pretty slow, right? But if you have the stake and the planting and the mulching and the overpass system, that's like all tasks. It ends up taking quite a lot of time. There's a lot of passes through the field. So we just have a value for each one of those steps. Mulching is another one. And then if it's overpass, it's another charge. If it's paddock boundary, it's another charge. So that way we're able to kind of give a realistic estimate for the whole planting. The other component is like some farmers want to help, which is great. And some people say like, I'll take care of the mulch. It's not a super hard job. You drive around with your trailer and silage fork and toss wood chips on there. So that's sometimes an option. Some people want to figure out how to do the overpass themselves. So we'll do one row as an example. And then they'll repeat the process, the pattern as they see it there, and we'll teach them how to do it. So we kind of work with a lot of DIY. The job that I was at yesterday in New Jersey, we did all the layout and planned it as much as we could yesterday, and we tried to get the overpass system all set up so that's right. And then they're going to finish off some more of the trees and do all the mulching themselves.
Okay, I'm gonna invite Chuck if you want to come off mute and ask your question, so it can be communicated how you want it communicated.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking because how we typically lay out buffers and tree plantings, we'll just run a cam line and you'll just have one guy, you'll pace it off, guy or gal, pace it
Mhm.
off, and just throw a flag every spot. Or, occasionally we do use a tree planter, so that's really nice. Just throw a stake at the end there, have a mark on your wheel, and when that wheel comes around your 10 or 12 or whatever feet, and you just drop a tree in, and that works real well because we planted, I think, like 450 trees in about 4 hours that way, and pretty good survivability. It worked real well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar like with planning at a bigger scale and using equipment. Just one of the things that we found is like when we start, if your rows aren't pretty straight with the overpass, then you get all kinds of things pulling and twisting, tends to come apart more. So that's why we spend more time on the layout.
And then
Um,
oh, go ahead, sorry.
no, go ahead.
We have,
I was gonna say about like, Propagate has like their planting strategy where they just have a GPS and a paint spray mark. When you get to, I'd say if we get to bigger fields, bigger pastures, that'll make a lot more sense. Um, we just found it takes a lot more time to lay them out and plant them in silvopasture than it does on the buffers. So
Amanda also
Thank you.
had a question, or I don't know what that's.
I was just trying, you were talking about 6 trees an hour. Is that like per person? So if you had a 2-person crew, then you'd be able to do more. I
yeah,
mean, with the,
that's per person. That's right. Yep.
okay.
Yep. Yeah. And then what we'll try to do is figure out how many hours the whole job will take, and then how many people we have, and then, figure out how many days the whole job will take so we can try to get our schedule lined up and have the equipment there. I would say like, in Lancaster County, almost all the plantings happen with just a sharpshooter spade. And, we're digging small holes right in the pasture. There's no other soil prep. Um, we just flip the sod over, and you can go pretty fast when you start getting up where I live on Quarry Drive. And we've done some upland plantings. We've moved to a lot more using the auger. And that's why it's a really good idea to do that shovel test on the consultation. So I'm sure you guys know in certain areas where you're living, like if you can just wear yourself out with the shovel real fast. Um, if you get to some of this rocky stuff and some of the farms, I mean, by the time we drill the hole with the auger, and there wasn't enough dirt to bury the roots in because it was all shale and shanners. So that's another difficulty, I guess, of doing some of these upland sites. And there are places that will really benefit from the trees, and trees will do well, but there's not hardly enough soil to cover the roots with. Yes. Did I interrupt you then, Lydia?
No, that was it for questions in the chat so far.
Okay. Okay, so let's say that people, a lot of times I think people get more excited to have some of these diversity trees under here. So we dropped in some apples. Um, if it was our project, we'd probably tend to go with a standard apple or maybe a semi-standard. Um, just because uh those smaller dwarf apples really aren't going to work that well in this kind of system. So it's going to mean a standard sized tree, so it's going to take a long time to get fruit. But then we're looking for really disease resistant apples that a lot of the ones that we pick are in like the PRI program, which is Purdue, Rutgers, Illinois, where they've tested and they have a lot of disease resistant apple varieties that are resistant to fire blight and that sort of thing. Because we know like this kind of system, it's going to be a low input system. Like you can't manage apples one every third tree. They're going to be too spread out. So the trees are just going to have to be there to service the livestock. And then if they do well, then they'll hopefully offer a nice homestead or, it could be a tiny U-pick operation or something like that. But most people are a little less motivated if they're already cattle operators and they just really want to enhance their grazing. While I'm mentioning apples, those are a species that cows will love. They're great leaf quality, kind of like the mulberry. We had a dairy where the cows couldn't individually reach the tree leaves because they were up over 6 feet, but that didn't mean they wouldn't lean the tree shelter over for their fellow cows to nibble those tree leaves. So they were really hard on those apples. So I've also mostly talked about cattle, a little bit about pigs and sheep and goats, but we've also protected against horses. And you can imagine in Amish communities, a lot of times they'll also graze their horses there. So we've had Plantra makes like some kind of extension to the shelter to go up to like 7 feet, but I think we've kind of that wasn't a fun project because of how high those were. Um, we are playing around with a hog halo, which is mostly for hogs. And Austin asked me today, do you think that would work for horses if we put like a little halo around the top of the tree shelter to keep horses away from it? Which I think it might. Okay. So let's kind of dial back in to um, a few documents that we kind of want to take with us when we go to the site assessment. I think I showed you the same version of this particular document. This is our consultation protocols a little bit earlier. Want to try to go over the questionnaire. Hopefully we'll get that from the farmer. We got a month or so for that to happen. And I don't know, it might be a little different if we have how many of us, 15 or 20 or 30 of us. That's a different type of consultation than just one-on-one or one-on-two. But we'll bring our map with us. Um, all of this stuff, our measuring tape, shovel for a shovel test, their questionnaire questions, planting plan, and then we'll plan on doing all these things. We'll talk through their goals, uh, try to learn how their grazing works, and all these things. And then after we spend some time with the farmer, then we'll walk the site and look for the lay of the land, look for those wet areas, and figure out where that phase um, where that phase one might work. And so a few other things that we want to do, especially if it's a long ways away, I want to take my GPS and take measurements of actual points for anchor points. Um, I especially want to know where those water lines are. I want to know where those gate openings are. places where I want to give a little more space. And I want to do some soil tests as well. So that's the kind of thing we're going to arm ourselves with before we go. I think that's the same document, but I will share this with you guys in there, in that little drive here. We also want to have the crew lead in mind, and the reason I bring this up is I have a couple of linked documents here that we use to kind of go through the job. We have what we call the implementation checklist as well. We got a little bit of redundancy in here, but this is basically we have different consultants doing different things. So plans approved by the landowner. The flags are counted and color coordinated. By that, we're talking about like each species has its own color flag. Projects managers lay those flags out. Ideally, we're there like a week ahead of the crew. Um, want the landowners to see the placements of those. Now it's um, for the most part, want to try to get them to try to picture the plan before we get there and set it all up and find out that it's not right. In some cases, it's real easy for people to picture what it will look like. In other cases, they have a hard time imagining that. So then all of these are protocols that our crew will use. We're preparing the live stakes. We're getting the bare root trees dipped, um, seedlings, removing side branches. This is information on how to install the stakes, how to dig the holes, how to plant the trees. Obviously, this is like just a reminder for crew leaders to go over all this stuff because some of our guys um, work all the time, and then we have a few seasonals. You saw probably some job openings. We have a handful, like I don't know if it's 2 to 4 folks that are showing up, and they've done this, but not exactly in the way we do it. So we try to go over all those things ahead of time. And there's a lot of little things that have to go right. None of them are particularly hard, but it just helps a lot of these little tricks and tips we've kind of collected over the time, and it just helps the job to go well. So this is kind of all the little steps that our um, crew leader will have to be involved with, and then it always kind of ends with the project manager being there, approving it, and then talking about that maintenance schedule. So I'm thinking like with USC, like you guys will have to think about what that looks like for a project that you put out for bid. And it's it's going to be a little more interesting, I think, maybe than some of your other projects, and maybe we can strategize about how to make that a success for getting someone else to run with a plan that's a little more particular. Do you have thoughts on that or questions about how we can make that fly?
Right now, a lot of well, I will say just a couple districts have gotten back to me and they think that they would like to plan it where they are the implementer and we're all kind of helping each other implement, along with potentially the Tompkins CCE agroforestry apprentices.
Okay.
And
Yes.
I think that's a great idea so that everyone can get an idea of how it all goes down, and then maybe we can move on to hiring folks. And I don't want to ever let that go about hiring folks because I think in order to do this at scale, it can't just be us doing it.
Right.
After
Yeah.
reaching out to planting contractors specifically, they do not at all seem opposed to installing the fence. They just want to see some type of standard or typical design so that they can do it how we would like it. And then that's it.
Yeah. No, I think it's all doable. It's just all got little details that just have to be learned or figured out. Yep. Yep. And so that's our implementation checklist. Um, I think I already over went through this. You know, we have people that are going to pack the trees, so they have to know all that stuff. But I was going to go to one last piece that we're going to do um, in our field, and we'll call this the south pasture and give that a name. The one last thing that we will always do is we can add notes to all of these pastures. And this could happen in another sort of document. It wouldn't necessarily have to be in overyield, of course. But it'll have like the species count. So we have like 310 stems. We need 300, and we'll put this will be a redundant um, piece of information so that it gets to the crew and so on. And this will be like for the layout map. We'll put overpass, and we'll put all the notes for that um, particular pasture so that we can see all those notes when we then print it out, carry those with us to the job site. So it was a little bit of redundancy in there but we try usually when we're planning, that's where we keep the notes for each little section with the goals, the species, the spacing, and then the tree counts. And then sometimes it gets a little more nuanced then if there are a bunch of um, let's say an apple section for the home use, they're going to try to function as shade trees as well. Then a lot of times we'll think about the organization of those, like we might have like the early droppers can have a little bit of a drop timing or calendar for the apples along the way. So those are just kind of the things that we want to try to ask about as well, if those are species that show up on the list that the farmer's interested in. Somebody asked a little bit about the budget. I think I can share with you a generalized like QuickBook invoice, but one of the things that can really change uh the the budget. Well, let's talk whole numbers just a little bit. You guys that buy a lot of potted trees, potted stock. Almost all of those are like straight seedling trees, right? But when you start getting into apples that would be grafted, honey locusts that are grafted persimmons, or then like tissue cultured trees like mulberry, um, maybe some of the black locust that Propagate has, then you start paying a good bit more for those genetics. And so that can definitely drive the budget up. You know, for example, if you guys bought black locust seedlings that were 4 feet high, I mean, they might be $3 a piece versus a grafted apple tree that might be 25 or 30. So it definitely adds a lot of costs to the project, and that's often one of the things that we're trying to balance is, you know, function and cost. So it's maybe another reason for some diversity there. But having the right genetics really makes sense, especially if you're going with smaller numbers of trees per acre, and you really have a sense of how those trees are going to perform there. Then if you can make it even out, I think it makes more sense to plant fewer trees. So let me jump back I see we've got a few minutes left, and I will spend a little time after this making sure some of those Google Docs are in a separate folder too. And I think Lydia was able to share that drive, which doesn't have a whole lot in it there. We spent some time on on species, and I was gonna kind of jump back to this concept that I think mixing kind of some of the fast and medium growing species still makes sense. Although I can see a case going the other way, so I might talk myself um, back out of it. But if you have other questions about species, we can try to do that. But we kind of went through our design protocol for part one. And then as we get to the end of um, kind of have some things on paper, this is how we go forward with it. So we follow up with client, finish our designs, clarify that. And at some point along the line, we want the farmer client to be happy with that and really try to avoid last minute changes. As you know, those can always be stressful. And then we'll send out an estimate. And the one final thing that we do is we put all this stuff together in a client portfolio for them, which has like a lot of the stuff that we've already developed, our summary, our synopsis, and colored maps. So they have a record of what we planted and where. We'll put in our tree species profiles for the trees that they have, and then try to get them um, set up with a routine of taking care of those trees or having a way of doing that. And so that kind of brings me to the last piece, and this is something that we would then include in the research resources that we put in that portfolio, and it's our aftercare and management guide. And there's some things that you're already pretty well aware of here, but I'll just dial down into I think it's if I keep scrolling here, I'm gonna hit it, but maybe not. Um, Here it is. It is basically like our aftercare and maintenance worksheet, and this is kind of something that we tend to do twice a year if we can. We estimate it takes about, I think the old estimate was 1 minute. I think it takes a little more than that. Depends on what year it is. Um, we have pruners, we have all this stuff with us, and we actually take records with us so that we can tally if there's any mortality. We'll mark those shelters with an X. Weed inside the tube, trim off those side branches that are growing in the tube. And so this is our little protocol, and we take photos and then keep records of it. But we really like to do maintenance twice a year in those first couple of years. And then when you kind of get to year 3 or 4, then that maintenance piece can be a good bit more time consuming. You'll have larger branches that inside the tube, you kind of have to slit the tube and cut those out. And but then after you get it at that stage and everything's out of the tree tube, the maintenance kind of lets up. The other thing we do is put a vul deterrent in there. It's a blood meal castor oil mixture. I have no idea if it works or not, but it doesn't cost very much. And we're walking by anyway, so um, how we tend to roll on the aftercare piece. So, who's got a question to wrap us up today? Is this helpful or interesting? Kind of nitty gritty, some of it. Um, there's a question in the chat.
Well, Cole just said excellent. Maybe if we give folks a minute,
Okay.
something will transpire.
And I probably don't wait long enough. It feels like a long time, but you got to hit the button first. So
It is
Gosh, we really are hearing a lot of people struggling with bowls. It sounds like such a common problem, and I'm wondering all the things you've tried. Like if it is blood meal and castor oil, what does someone else have success with that? Or yeah, we're just hearing so many people struggle with it.
okay. So I don't know if you're here earlier, but did we talk about the Volgards themselves wrapping around the trees? I mean, I think that's our first line of defense. So this is
Okay.
a little piece of it's basically like you can buy these tree wraps for orchards. Some of them are a little smaller in diameter, and the white vinyl ones probably work the best because they're real slippery, and that goes inside the tree shelter. Now it's not
Okay.
bomb because basically these tree shelters are like vol hotels, and especially when you pile a bunch of these malt wood chips in there, um, you're you're sort of creating a little habitat for them. But if you can protect that first like 4 or 5 inches of that bark, that's been a game changer for us. The second thing is what with a paddock boundary fence where you're creating a line of trees that nobody walks through, no cattle move through, it almost always ends up being a little brushier than the rest of the pasture. And that's really like an alleyway for voles and rodents to travel. So we find that well, like with the overpass and we're getting grazing 360 around those trees, that's really helped kind of reduce the vole pressure because there's not like I guess if you were really into the habitat, you might be more excited about that little refugia area there, but that seemed to help a lot too.
We, so I guess it sounds like for those little areas where there's no grazing, are you recommending you either um, do weed whacking or mowing or just that's too detailed? And then also we've noticed some people especially are struggling with apple. I guess the underground, they're like piling mulch up on top. It seems like a really great habitat for voles. And then underneath and underneath underground, the roots are getting
Hmm.
snipped. It just sounds like really the people are struggling hard with it. So anyway,
Yeah. I've been in meetings where they suggested like we need more terriers
uh-huh.
around.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, like people, owls,
more
kestrels,
more
everything.
owls, yeah, more predators, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Does your cat farm that you have there help with that at all?
It does. It does. They like to bring him to for me to look at on the front porch. So yeah, start farming cats. Don't the downside of that is they bring birds too, which I
Yeah,
absolutely
they're so
despise.
indiscriminate. It's really not
Yeah, they
good.
we haven't been able to train them yet to dial in those.
So we have one last question here from Brett. At what age or approximately how many years after establishment do you stop worrying about voles?
5 years. I don't know.
I was gonna say that was a really great answer.
If it was true. I mean, it's like when what I mentioned this the other day. I saw this in a site. I went down to
Oh, there we go.
there was we used these smooth Volgards, but we started using these really nice ventilated ones, and I'm pretty sure that the little creatures can just crawl up on these little holes in there. And I saw a vole, well, it might have been a mouse. I wasn't there to witness it, but like at about 8 or 10 inches above the tree line. Um, so that was a little frustrating to see them crawling up on those ventilated plantra wraps. So I think we might go back to the smooth vinyl ones, which seem to be un crawlable or whatever. Bowls make great coasters. Could sell them for a profit. Yeah, it's a business waiting. That's time has come.
So I'm going to recognize that it's 3 o'clock and folks will
Yeah.
likely jump off here. Cole just has another question about when you remove the wraps or when the shelters come off. And I would just like to preface that question by saying it's probably in New York 2 years later than what it is for Joshua.
You guys think you're 2 years slower, Boris?
At least one to two.
Okay. I'll keep in mind I'm not in Lancaster County. I'm not as far away, but what we've done on our bigger projects is we'll start by slitting those tubes. Um, we slit them where there's little pairs of holes for a planter shelter to put we'll slit them right through there. That way we can reuse them on another tree at some point if it works out that way. Um, we'll start by just opening the tube, and then some of the farms where we have I'd say we're at year 5, maybe 6. No, I don't think it's 6. I think it's probably like year 4 or 5. We'll just have like a little piece of that tree shelter left to hold the poly wire, and the other trees maybe are not quite ready to come out of the shelters yet. But that's when it's starting to happen, like years 3 or 4. And what happens is if you don't open them enough, early enough, they don't have to be removed, but just put a slit through them, because you'll get places where like leaves and stuff will just stick in there, and it looks like a place where you could start getting some moisture and some fungus growing there, maybe be hard on the trees that way. So yeah, and that's going to be the challenge of multi-species rows, is that some of them are ready to come out, some of them aren't. Um, I really want to work with Ken Cove on developing a UV resistant sort of um, we'll say spandex um, insulated tree wrap that you can hang polywire on it, move it at different heights, and then keep rolling like that.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for offering us this great training both today and on Wednesday. And everybody look out for Big Check's new product of pressed bowl coasters coming soon. And
Oh
gross,
yeah.
gross. So everybody please register for our event on the 7th too. And I'm gonna stop recording and bid you all farewell. Thank you so much, Joshua.
Yeah, it was great. Glad to be here. Thanks, everyone.